All right, Dylan. So to start again, briefly describe what schools you went to prior to Silver Creek. We'll say that.
Okay. Before Silver Creek, I went to Fall River Elementary School and Trail Ridge Middle School. Those are connected over in the east part of Longmont. And then Trail Ridge feeds into Skyline, so I went there for my first 2 years. After those 2 years, I had different reasons for wanting to come to Silver Creek High School.
And what were some of those reasons?
Over at Skyline, I didn't have many friends in the areas that I was hoping. They were more like engineering and technology, computer focused, like let's say majors, I guess. And I like to hang out more around creative and artistic type people, as well as I had some friends that I'd made prior to going to Skyline who went here instead of Skyline, so I already had a few friends that I knew, you know.
Mm-hmm. Who were those guys?
Specifically, I've been friends with Ty Swissler from school for a long time. He introduced me to a couple of people. He introduced me to Alex Lathrop-Melting, who also introduced me to Armand Long, and that whole group of friends. I have, there are 4 or 5 guys in that group now.
So, in addition to like Alex and Armand and Michael Eckstein and those guys.
Mm-hmm.
So before you came here to Silver Creek, like you said, you went to Skyline and you went to Trail Ridge, and those are vastly different from, say, Altona or Silver Creek. So
Yeah.
describe what it was like being there, I guess.
I don't know. It's hard to remember.
Yeah,
That
it can be
whole thing,
brief. It can be brief.
Yeah, it's just I don't know. It felt a lot more serious. I'm not sure about Altona or anything like that, but it felt
Mm-hmm.
a lot more. I don't know. Nobody in those communities, school-wise, was really willing to make new acquaintances. Everybody was really in friend groups,
Mm-hmm.
so it was hard to really get in with people you didn't know. But around here, it seems like it's a lot different. You can talk to anyone, and they'll talk to you, even if you don't see that relationship with them going anywhere else. You
Right.
think you'll be able to be greater friends with that person. It's pretty cool.
Not so exclusive.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, yeah. So with those guys, what do you guys typically do when you're not here at Silver Creek?
I don't know. We just like to hang out. A lot of us work now, so it's harder for us to do that. We don't really have greater moments of free time, but when we do, which happens pretty rarely, we all get together and, I don't know, sit down and play board games for a while or things like that. Everybody in the group has different tastes, so it really depends on who's there.
Mm-hmm. How is it? How difficult is it trying to find time around both school and work? Trying to find ways to get to be with the guys.
Yeah, it's pretty difficult. I would say it's harder the more of us that are working, because it really comes down to when our schedules match up. But if there are a couple guys who aren't working currently, because they just quit or because they haven't started work yet or whatever, it's different because neither of those guys are working. They'll usually end up hanging out, and then the other people come join in or whatever. But school is always a factor, obviously. But we're all at school at the same time, I don't think any of us really do some kind of heavy extracurricular activity.
Mm-hmm.
So right after school, we're all usually available unless there's work involved,
Where do you work?
I don't work anymore, but I used to work at King Soopers.
Okay.
I just, I wanted to focus on my school more, and I think a couple of my friends might consider that option as well. But
Well, who did you work with at King Soopers?
at King Soopers, I was working with my friend Alex Lathrop-Melting and another one of my friends, Gage Strickland.
Yeah, I'm having trouble remembering his last
Yeah.
name. What do you? So you worked at King Supers and you're more focused on school now. So are you looking? You kind of got away from having a job
Yeah,
to focus on school. So are you? And this is your senior year. So I mean, are you looking to pursue some sort of academic after high school?
You mean going to college?
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. That was one of the biggest factors for me was that I was, weighing specifically money against money. It was like, would I rather work right now just to get some money that I can spend, or maybe I could save that money, go to college with some money saved up, or would I rather spend that time that I'm working, which took up a lot of my schedule, at least to me, because I had work, school, and my own activities, as well as a long drive from here to where I live in Firestone. It takes up a lot of my time, so I wanted to be able to focus more on scholarships and things like that, so that it'll be easier for me specifically in college. I don't care so much about right now because I'm just a high school senior. I can do what I want to, within the limitations of large amounts of money, but.
What are you looking to study then?
I'm going to probably go to some kind of computer-infused art school where I can learn a good deal about game development.
So you're into video games.
Mm-hmm.
So this is kind of an interesting point in our culture because video games have become less geared towards a certain market. Like it's more integrated into sort of everyone's lives. So what's kind of like your take on that? What have you seen with
Yeah,
that?
I'd say that's definitely true. I think mobile gaming has definitely brought a lot of people who normally wouldn't consider themselves to be one to play video games into that market. I think they're all included in some way. I think you can say to most people, oh, remember that Mario game? And everybody's going to have some kind of association with it, at least everybody that's within our generation, because although we didn't grow up with it because that was a little bit before our time, I'd say that it's still an integral part of our history, especially since maybe our parents imposed that on us, or it's just something you learn about because it's like a major character. And it's really interesting because it's just something that doesn't exist at all. Mario's not real, obviously, but it's something that everybody knows, like it's a common concept.
Right. What part of the video game sort of culture do you think you take part in? Because there's varying.
Yeah, exactly. I think definitely I want to be able to make games which bring people into them using storytelling and try to change their point of view. I'm more of a single player story based kind of person, and while I think that it's important to have mechanics in a video game because definitely that's something that a lot of single player games get hate for, I think it's important to be able to tell a story more than anything.
Yeah.
Because there are games that do that in some way, but mostly incorporate some kind of multiplayer component that bogs down that story, that really just it has to change the story a little bit to be able to fit in that multiplayer component.
Do you have any examples?
I think that Halo is a good example, the video game Halo. A good example of the way that's evolved, because originally it was meant to be half kind of a game that you can play with your friends and half kind of a game that really tells this grand story about, some space marine that's really interesting, And it really had opportunity to continue with that. The problem is with the advancement of other games in the similar genre, with mechanics, they had to keep up, so they had to add their own things in and focus more on that than really the story, and it really changes the way the game advances. So by now there's really much more of a focus on the multiplayer and how it, brings people online together, as opposed to telling an individual consumer how they should perceive this world and bring people into it,
Yeah. Well, what are some of the to connect to that, I mean, originally whenever you would play multiplayer, there would be no explanation for it. And Halo was one of the first to actually explain it through its story and make it connect.
And that's a really good feature of that game. I think that it's even worse as part of our video game culture to only have a multiplayer component and not explain how it ties in or anything like that, because any game could do that. It really doesn't show a level of proficiency in creative storytelling or anything like that.
Sure. But then it's not necessarily so much telling a story, it's a game, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't you say that it's more, it then goes back to just being a game that you then get to play with your friends.
Exactly. I think, and I'm not saying that like that's a bad thing to happen, but I just know that there will be plenty of people out there who take care of that kind of thing, and I want to be in the field that views games as largely an art that like enhances storytelling with interactivity, because it really changes the way a person perceives what's going on, as opposed to just watching a movie. If you were in the movie, it's obviously very different.
It's interesting that you say art, because video games are perceived in so many conflicting ways, where some people see it as a piece of art, some people see it as a sport, some people see it as just a hobby. Yeah. I mean, where do you see it as?
I think it's an interesting blend of all three of those things, because it's really, and I know for a fact that there are plenty of people who can become addicted to it. It's just like so obviously it's not just an art form. Right. It's like an interactive media that really not only involves the consumer, but in most cases revolves around the consumer and focuses on how to get them to want to be involved in the game. And I think that's largely a part of what makes popular or largely funded games the way they are, because they all have to kind of pander or advertise to a certain market in a certain way. Each game does it differently, but some of them focus on trying to act very competitive or have a high level of mechanic, so that people think it's very competitive and want to play it as a sport. So the people who view video games as more of a sport will want to play that game, or people who have an association with an ongoing series of games, they want to make sure that their newest game looks like something different while still including the old features to bring everybody into it.
Is that something you would want to do?
Yeah. I don't know if I'm really interested in the idea of a series of video games, because it's definitely hard to live up to the standards set by the first video game if it's successful enough to warrant a sequel, right? If you already have a story in mind for all of these games, like if you were basically planning out what is the equivalent of a movie trilogy in a video game, I think that's definitely possible. But I have a hard time saying that it's a good idea after a game has been successful to just say, hey, let's make another one.
Right. Well, that's hard to say, though, because, I mean, when it comes to a movie, you can stop making a movie because, I mean, it's the end of the story, right? But when it comes to a video game, that's so immersive that it's a game. So the technology will improve and graphics will improve. So by adding on to the story, you're creating I don't want to say a better game, but don't you think that there is value in continuing the game?
That's true. If your game is unique enough to be able to put out there for an audience, then that probably means you've invented or innovated in some way. And that means that later on you'll want to be able to bring it back, so that those innovations and the things that made the original game unique will make the new game stand out, but within the new graphical and mechanical components of the systems or whatever is advanced in that amount of time.
Right. Well, I mean, if your original goal wasn't to create a series, but it becomes successful, you look at a game like Dishonored.
Yeah.
It was just some project that Bethesda released, and then it turned successful, so they added on to the series with the new console and more advanced technologies. Or would you, do you, because you said that, I mean, that if the original intent isn't to create a series, that you should end it with with where you originally wanted it to end. But since it's so immersive, do you continue it now that it's successful, or do you quit it even despite the fact?
I think a direct sequel, like I said, is still a bad idea, but I think that it's possible to create like something alike to a spiritual successor, or maybe just a spin-off game set in the same universe. If that's what made your universe, or that's what made the game unique, was something like the universe, like let's say Ratchet and Clank. That's a really unique universe, a really cool, immersive place, and a really interesting, set of characters and things like that. Maybe if you didn't want to make another Ratchet and Clank game, like I would probably not have, unless that's what they were planning. I would never know, really, but to me personally, it would disappoint me to just make another sequel just for the sake of it. I would probably take that universe and put new characters in it.
Mm. Sorry, I thought the battery was down or something. Kind of lost my train of thought. What sort of, because you want to create video games. You want to be a developer? I'm guessing. Is there anything? What sort of unique qualities or personal traits that you have that you can add on to the already huge market of video gaming?
I'd like to think, at least, that I have a high level of creativity. I'm always planning or creating something. I like to, make small card or board games in my free time, or draft up a new world and write a little bit about it. Though the problem lies in that I've never been a great, complete novel writer. I would never want to just write a whole world, or I would never probably want to commit to creating a whole, a whole movie or something like that. I think it's different with a video game because, especially when I plan to become an independent developer, although it's not out of the realm of possibility for me to become a developer under a larger studio.
Mm-hmm.
I think that as an independent developer where you design all aspects of the game, it's just different because it's like, I don't know, you get to do things like storyboarding and like creating the universe and all that, as well as taking breaks, or largely, I guess it's the other way around. You do a lot of programming to get the game to work and get all the parts to fit together, as well as doing the creative process and,
right.
Generating all the story components and things.
So your innovation isn't so much necessarily, because, when it comes to movies, it's I have cool stories I want to create. When it comes to video games, it's more like I have cool programming I want to implement.
Yeah, exactly. And it can be things like I have this cool mechanic in mind that I don't think anybody's ever thought of. I've never seen it in a game. Or even if it has been done in a game, maybe it's an updated version, or maybe it's something with a better story to go along with it. Things like that. Yeah, I just have multiple story ideas, and I'm very quick to come up with something if I need to or if I want to. So that's what I think makes me stand out in that field, because I definitely have the creative processes already set in place.
Right. Do you see video games dying out at any point? It's such a huge part of our culture right now.
I get that, yeah.
But movies have been around for a little over 100 years. They've been marketed and commercialized for about 100 years, and it doesn't seem that they're going anywhere. But video games have been around for 20, 30 years at the max. So do you see them going anywhere at any point, or do you see them becoming like movies where they're like this huge part of our culture? Because they are right now, and everyone talks about them.
Exactly. I think that our generation sees video games a lot differently than older generations, because we think that they're just as important as movies or things like that. Because when we were bored, or when we just wanted something to do, we wanted to look at some new world or something like that, why not play a video game? It's like the same thing as a movie, but also you get to interact with it. I know there are people who prefer movies and things like that to, sate their boredom, but I just think that our generation sees that in that scope. Because older generations tend to see video games as like some kind of weird time waster that, obviously it very much was that in the era of the NES and the Super Nintendo, things like that, because it wasn't very developed. It was hard to fully tell this whole grasping world story because, I mean, though people might say that's not true or this game had such a cool theme, things like that, it was very much just built around like the components that the NES could use, things like that. But now we can do whatever we want. So it's really about a creative thing. I think it definitely could be more like movies, especially with the advent of virtual reality technology, because that's even more immersive than going to a movie because you're in the thing physically. Although people say, wow, I felt like I was really there in a movie that's really immersive, you very much are in the place and you interact with things physically. Right. I think that's a huge emerging market, and I'd love to be able to work with that someday,
All right, yeah. Because I'm trying to think here. So you see video games expanding rather than shrinking down.
Mm-hmm.
You don't see them going anywhere. Do you think that they could at some point, because like you said, it's more immersive, do you see them replacing movies at any point? Or do you see them more like coexisting?
Yeah, I definitely would think they would coexist because, I mean, though the whole theater market might die down because I think our generation is much more reclusive. We'd rather do something at home if it were possible. Mm-hmm. I think that once Netflix gets a hold of streaming movies first day or something like that, movies will become more of a private thing. I still don't think they'll die down. I think, or die out. Maybe they will die down, but I don't think they'll die out because it's a very integral part of our life.
Movies.
Especially to be able to watch other characters doing something that we don't have to worry about, and we'll see their actions and see what they're doing and things like that. So I think that definitely it's two very different ways to experience a similar feeling, So I think those will both be around. I think video games at some point might be bigger than movies. It really depends on how the market goes, but at this point, I don't think so. I don't think that would happen. If large, heavily funded games keep going the way they're going, they'll just be pretty similar, and movies, might change, things like that. But I think it's definitely possible for those popular games to be changed in a large way because people are starting to criticize their ideas, like they have so much money to put into these games, and they usually put a lot of it into the way the game looks, and people are starting to realize that that's not what makes a whole game.
Right. Well, so, like you said, we're starting to become more reclusive.
Yeah.
Netflix and chill, if you would. If it gets to the point where, so you're saying where, since we're starting to more and more want to just be at home, and video games and Netflix become the grander two options, I mean, if we're becoming more reclusive and video games are very where it's very social, don't you see us more gearing towards more of like just watching Netflix all the time? Despite the fact that both of them, or you can just be at your house, including the thought that Netflix would have first day releases as provided with their service.
I think it's possible, but I still think there would be people who hope for a more engaging experience because watching a movie doesn't always, especially if you're doing it just in a relaxed environment, you're just doing it for your own comfort. I don't think it always brings you into it as much as a video game does because you don't feel like you're controlling the actions of the character. You're just watching what happens. I think definitely sometimes I've especially been kind of disenchanted with a movie when the main character does something either very out of character for them or something that I wouldn't see myself doing. It kind of breaks the experience for me because I'm left to wonder, what would have happened if they'd done what I would have done. But with a video game, I think that can happen much more easily for you. I mean, it's still possible for you to be unable to do something that you want to do, but it's much different, you know?
All right. To close out, it's 20 years in the future. You think you've become a game developer, right? What else do you see happening in developing in the next 20 years? We've gotten Star Wars Episode 9, possibly even 12, things like that. Like, what do you see happening? And you can generalize and sort of talk about like the culture of our society and things like that, but also like specific things like what you think will happen in Episode 9 of Star Wars or something like that. Like something like that to close out.
Sure.
Some projection, what you see.
Sure.
When you think 20 years from now.
Okay. So 20 years from now, our society will be much more advanced in the ways of stay-at-home technology, right? Most people who aren't into manual work or don't, physically do mechanical work with their hands, things like that, work from home and, Skype themselves in and things like that. They all work like virtually with minimal travel, like physical travel. Mm-hmm. So most people are at home for most of the time, but many stores have online outlets or delivery, things like that, to be able to connect people, to the outside world. So they don't necessarily need to leave their home as much, though there will always be a need for, like physical presence of other people, things like
sure.
that. So I think the school systems won't change very much. There will probably be a larger incorporation of technology, but people will still all show up to class and, do all assignments, though I think a lot of it will be done online and things. I think many retail stores and things like that will utilize some kind of, like, virtual cashier, virtual, attendant. They don't need to interact with people, because I think people of our generation, for some reason or another, have a harder time communicating directly with other people they don't know. Mm-hmm. So they'd much rather go to an online or not online, to like an order kiosk, a little digital touchscreen, than walk up to a counter and order something or something like that. Right. So I think that will replace many in-person things, just as the older generation fades out. I think largely the movie industry won't see much change because, and as well as the video game industry, I think both of them have very high standards already of graphical capability. A lot of the people who are computer generated in movies and video games look pretty realistic at this point. So I don't think we'll see much advancement there. I think the advancement will come in creativity or mechanical components. I think we'll probably have better processors and things like that for video games, and for movies I don't think we'll see a change in film, quality or anything like that, because I think Blu-ray technology is practically as far as we're going to get.
Right.
There might be some kind of small advancement, but I think it's pretty advanced already. So I think largely we'll be a very similar culture, although we'll be very reclusive and we'll be very technology-based. That's, I think, just a generalization of how we'll all be in a while, because it's hard for me to look back at like 20 years ago from now, what is it, 96? I guess, I wasn't around, but seeing movies and all this kind of stuff, about the culture, they were very much outward, social, and interactive people. We're just so much different now that I can't imagine ourselves being even more extreme later. I know it's not necessarily like a cause and effect specific type of deal, that 20 years from now will be 20 years farther, mm-hmm. in that way. But I just think that is really how it will go, because it's just, there's no need to interact with people, and I feel like the need to interact is what causes us to actually do it. Otherwise, we'd rather just sit in the comfort of our own home and do nothing.
All right, very cool, Dylan. Thank you very much.
Yeah.